We talked to new Braves hitting coach Tim Hyers yesterday, and you're going to what he had to say. Yes, welcome on into Braves Today for Tuesday, October 29th. Your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. Follow me on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. Follow the show on Twitter at Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and Instagram as well. And look who's back from his trip. It's Christian Rauh. Follow him on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh, R-A-U-H. And Christian, we had some fun while you were gone talking about Tim Hyers, the new hitting coach for Atlanta. Talking about Matt Olson yesterday, and people need to stop dogging him because Freddie Freeman's doing so well in the World Series. Right as you were getting back home yesterday, I had a chance. The Braves comms team set up a Zoom meeting with new Braves hitting coach Tim Hyers. We had a chance to sit down with him, ask questions, talk to him about his approach, about getting the news he's coming to Atlanta and all of that. And so a little bit of this is a repeat of some of the stuff we talked about last week, right? When we broke down the hire of Tim Hyers. I got to stop saying hire and hires at the same time. But later in the show, I do want to use some of what he said about what happened to Atlanta last year and some of what he does as a coach to talk about the Braves players who you should or could see improve the most with Tim Hyers coaching. That's coming in the second segment. So stay tuned for that. But first, Christian, I want to play you a clip real quick where Tim Hyers breaks down the three core tenets of who he is as a hitting coach.
Yeah, I'm a simple guy. I like to keep things simple so that players can understand. We can have a confident approach. Yeah, I believe in some core principles, and three that I'm going to preach, day in and day out is game planning, swing decisions, and our movements in the batter's box. Game planning, we have so much information these days, which is great. I love information. But I think that's the art of coaching this day and age, is funneling that information so we have that one, idea, that one thought that we can go compete in the batter's box. And I think a lot of hitters, they can only think about one thing at a time and hit 97 miles an hour. So game planning is big for me, is taking the information, what's the most important part, and let's go battle. Two is swing decisions. I mean, you're only as good as the strikes you swing at. I mean, it's basic. And I think you can break that down into two groups: is chase percentage, kind of like, can we eliminate some chase? And what can we swing at? What are we swinging at for our strengths, in parts of the zone? And I think there's some ways we can identify that to get players swinging at their pitches. And then, lastly, is their movement pattern, is the mechanics.
Okay, so on hearing those three things, what's your first thought about the decision to bring on Tim Hyers as hitting coach for the Atlanta Braves?
Yeah, overall, those are definitely just hitting fundamentals. There's no doubt about that, but I like the way you broke them down. The second one, I think, really stuck out to me right off the bat, is making sure you're only good as the strikes that you swing at. That is very important. There's no doubt about that. But that is fundamental baseball. Got it. But that is obviously not the easiest thing to do when you have 100 miles an hour thrown at you, and then the next pitch you're getting 80 into the bottom corner. So there's definitely a really interesting approach that we could see differently here. I think the biggest thing here is when you talk about what we've seen from Hyers in the past, he has World Series victories. He won in 2018. He won with the Rangers last year. So he's coming in with championship pedigree, and that's really big. That's huge, especially because, just last season, the Braves hitting coach was one of the best hitting coaches in baseball. So
he won MLB Coach of the Year from Baseball America.
Right.
Kevin Seitzer did.
Right. So making this transition is not obviously going to be, the easiest one when you look at, things had to change. But when you make the decision to make the move now, and at least you're going to a guy that has hometown roots, likes the area, and he has, championship pedigree on his behalf. So when he is speaking, at least in somewhat fundamental form, I still take it a little more seriously, because the details are, are really important. And I really like what we've heard from him in that one, especially the second one. I really like what I heard from him in that second portion there.
Yeah, you're only as good as the strikes you swing at. Like that is, I've talked a lot on here about the philosophy of hitting strikes hard. And it's a slightly different mindset, right? And I'm not saying Kevin Seitzer came out with that quote or anything, but it kind of encompasses you are attempting to crush balls in the strike zone. And this is a little bit more that phrase is a little bit more selective because it's saying yes, like we want to hit strikes, we want to hit them hard. I think that's assumed with this roster, but we don't want to chase as much. And I think a lot of these players, you can see the chase. And I think that's one of the areas you'll see some improvement. Again, we're going to get to those guys in the second segment. But to the point of him being a local guy, again, went to Newton High in Covington. He lives in Atlanta. His family lives in Atlanta. From what I understand, he's about 45 minutes or an hour from the ballpark. The assumption is that they're going to move a little bit closer. I think is what he intimated when he spoke to David O'Brien of The Athletic last week, just to avoid the Atlanta traffic being so bad. But he was not campaigning for this job. He was happy in Texas. He, he won a World Series. Obviously, he was treated well by the organization, and Atlanta called Texas and requested permission to interview him, which is something you have to do if a guy's under contract with somebody else. So Chris Young, the general manager of the Rangers, called Tim Hyers and said, "Hey, the Braves want to interview." He met with AA, he met with Brian Snitker, and decided, yeah, this is what's good for me and my family. He said, after talking to Alex in the front office and obviously Brian, talking about Brian Snitker, I felt at ease. I loved their vision. I loved the things that they had to say about building an organization, building an offense, and moving forward and winning championships. And I do think that his focus on distilling the information down is very useful. And I think he's right that is the biggest part of being a coach, is not only being able to condense down all of the data into actionable information, but getting guys to be able to listen to you and incorporate it. And when Kevin Seitzer got fired, he talked to David O'Brien of The Athletic after the firing. And that's one of the things he said, is he couldn't get the guys to listen to him about not pressing and not trying to do too much. And so I think when you see what Tim Hyers, how despite all of the injuries the Rangers had last year, how they were still able to change the approach and hit with runners in scoring position and all of that, like Atlanta did not. I think that's a sign that he gives you that extra dimension where he can get through to the guys still. And I think that is an underrated part of that game planning conversation that he talked about, is not only do you have to get the information and distill it down to the players, they have to listen to you and they have to incorporate it. And for some reason or another, Kevin Seitzer wasn't able to get through to the guys. I feel like Tim Hyers should be able to.
No, I agree. I do think so too. And there's a really thin line between finding respect in the clubhouse and then quickly them not listening to you. We just found that out in this past season. So bringing in a guy that has 2 World Series, championships as a hitting coach under his belt obviously helps. It's going to help right from the beginning.
Credibility.
And then just knowing that what he has done in the past, you mentioned it with Texas. He had a great season last year with Texas, regardless of what happened and them not making the postseason. Still had a pretty good year. Overall, I think they had a team OPS of 685. Not the best numbers, but again, there were a lot of injuries. There were a lot of things happening with that roster. But that's what happened with Atlanta as well. So being able to find some adjustments and, going to his third point, ball movement and movement of just like the batters in general. He talked about, and I'm not sure if you have this in one of your videos, but he talked about how injuries were a big deal on Atlanta. And
actually, that's
okay.
I'll
I'll hold out tight.
It's exactly where I was segueing to. We don't know if he's had a chance to meet a lot of the players yet because a lot of them, leave when the offseason gets here. So we haven't had a chance to meet everybody yet. But he did say he's been watching some video and kind of studying, and he talked briefly yesterday about what happened to the Braves last season. So I'm going to play that clip real quick.
Just watching some video, kind of doing some studying here. I think that, some of the injuries caused some players to, get out of their swing. And I think the mental affects the physical. And when guys want to do more because they, some key players got hurt. And I think, we can clean up some of those patterns and get them back into their groove and, not trying to do too much, have those thoughts where I need to get a hit or I need to hit a homer here. And I think that messes up the physical.
Nothing groundbreaking, but exactly what we've been saying is that everybody was pressing too much because of the injuries. Kevin Seitzer said it. Now Tim Hyers has said it. And obviously it's just fundamentals, right? And I don't really, it sounds obvious to say that, like, yeah, you have to fix that. But I want to hear what you were going to say before I played the video about that issue.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the awareness is spot on, right? Exactly what he just said was what we've been kind of trooping on all season long about these injuries. And, there's definitely a few people that come to mind, and some of them stand out to gain the most, which we're going to talk about at the end of the show here. But when you look at how the injuries have affected Atlanta this season, and then they come back from their injuries and they're not always 100%, it's because Atlanta has seemed to always been playing from behind all season long. They found a way to make the postseason. Fantastic, great. Looking in hindsight, that's a fantastic thing. And, it'll be really nice to see what they can capitalize in 2025. Got it. Fantastic. But other than that, they were trailing all season long with so many different injuries from the beginning, from the first game of the season, Lindsay. And then once they returned, they struggled getting back into form. And for many of those players, we questioned, are they 100%? And this kind of gives the idea and kind of backs onto that point that they weren't. And we kind of already knew that. But now we're starting to understand and, unfolding the details a little bit, that they were working hard. They were overshooting, swinging at strikes they shouldn't have, going back to his second point, and things like that. So I do think that this is a really good aspect to think about in the offseason as they build upon moving into the spring, because injuries are going to happen. And if you have a hitting coach that is already aware of what's happening with those type of injuries, which I'm sure most are, but it seems that he's being pretty transparent to the media, which is really nice as well. Because if he's transparent to us, that means that he is very straightforward and transparent to his players, which is huge. And that's a very respectful thing that you're going to see in the clubhouse. Regardless of that fact, if he's already noticing that there are these types of patterns, then that will mean that he's able to adjust, based on assumption here, that he's going to be able to adjust and make things happen during the season, which is huge for a team like Atlanta, who's dealt with injuries for what, dare I say, 4 straight seasons now?
Yeah. A lot of them have been pitching injuries, but yeah, I mean, both regards, you've dealt with injuries, and obviously position players were the big one in 23 or 24. Sorry. Yeah. In just a second, we're going to get to the players that I've identified or we've identified should be able to improve the most under Tim Hyers and his philosophies. But real quick, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Encase Cards. It's a custom card manufacturer. Encase Cards takes the source photos of whatever you have it for. Maybe you're an artist. Maybe you are a musician. In my case, I used it for youth sports. I kept the sports theme, right? You submit your source photos to them. Their artists personalize it for your child. You can pick backgrounds. You can put on stats and demographic info, positions, team names, all that kind of stuff. Then they print it on high quality cardstock. They slab it and ship it straight to you as a keepsake. So check them out at ncasecards.com. That's NCASE cards.com. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay, Crosby, Christian Rauh, talking about speaking to Tim Hyers yesterday. And there's one more video I want to play real quick. And it kind of gets into one of the complaints that we heard, and the main complaint we heard from Chipper Jones about this team not being able to situationally execute the way that they needed to. Hyers addressed his thoughts on that yesterday.
In the big picture of the offense, if you dominate those things, I also think that helps your team be prepared, be disciplined, and also be fluid. Because the fluid part of this is important because you have to be able to score runs in multiple different ways. And there's days that we can slug, and obviously this team can slug and hits the ball really hard. I'm excited to be a part of that. But also there's days when you got to score runs in different ways. And how quick can we be fluid into identifying that and do that as a group, and to be consistent with it.
If you watch the Atlanta Braves in 2024, you know that they absolutely were not fluid in their approach when they were facing a pitcher who was not able to, who they were not able to just batch the ball against. And this is what people have been asking for. Tim Hyers believes in aggressively changing the approach when you realize we are not going to be able to just blast this guy to kingdom come. I would expect by the time a guy comes back up the second time, you may have already made adjustments to change what you do. And for the record, Chipper Jones chimed in yesterday on Twitter. Somebody asked him what his thoughts were on the hire and said, hey, sounds kind of like what you were suggesting a bit ago. And he said, quote, approach is good. Hunt the fastball, focus on the big part of the field, up to the middle, be better at situational hitting. Don't cloud the mind with too much info. Really good hire. This is what we wanted. We've kind of both looked at some players that might improve under Tim Hyers based on whether it's the approach stuff, the health stuff, things like that. Who do you think is going to be the biggest potential improver next season of the guys that are actually back next year?
Well, first I want to say about, that last video with Hyers there. It does sound like he agrees a lot with what Chipper is saying. So he must also have been throwing flip-flops to the TV. I'm guessing that was the case. Because when you talk about him being able to adjust and not talk about just always going for the home run ball, which earlier in the season I remember there was a piece that you wrote before Braves Today, the Substack, but you talked about the offense and you talked about how it was basically the warning track, always the warning track. They hit so many balls to the warning track, couldn't get the home run. If they would have adjusted there, what would the record would have been heading into the All-Star break? I reckon it would have been a lot different, right? So that goes back to talking about the pressing, I'm sure, from the old hitting coach, but discussing how Hyers is, looking to adjust. That's pretty optimistic and that's pretty exciting moving forward if something like that would to occur again in the early summer like it did in 2024. I think a guy that is most to stand the green the most in this one, and I think it's pretty obvious in my mind, Sean Murphy. I think Sean Murphy is a guy that right from the bat is going to be able to gain from the Hyers hire. So yeah, I'll do it for you. So you're not the only one.
Thank you.
But yeah, when you look at Sean Murphy's injury last year, just from that standpoint, the oblique injury obviously came back, wasn't as great from there. It was probably pressing a little much as you mentioned, and as Seitzer mentioned as well. And it took him a while to get back into form. Now, the adjustments could have helped Murphy on this one, and there's some other things I think that could help too. But yeah, Lindsay, I'm sure. Go ahead, take away.
Yeah, on the approach thing, about changing the approach, Sean Murphy's one of those guys where it feels like he needs to tweak some stuff there. He hit just 164 with runners in scoring position, 611 OPS, right? 7 walks to 18 strikeouts and 55 at-bats. And it feels like that is the symptom. We talked about this in the Sean Murphy show. He is an all or nothing in every single swing. I have never seen that dude do a halfway swing in my entire life. I mean, batting practice, he's cranking it. It is 100% swing. And I think he is the guy more so than anybody else. If you can adjust and get him to develop a consistent and legitimate B approach, that is not that is contact oriented and looking to be situational versus just crushing a ball, he is a good candidate there. But a guy that I think he can fix that has gotten worse in certain situations, and a lot of this is based off of this year, which was bad for everybody, right? But is Austin Riley. Stats weren't awful with runners in scoring position this year. Batted .238 with a 716 OPS. Not awesome, not terrible. 40 strikeouts, 7 walks, and 105 at-bats. but his 2-strike approaches have kind of cratered from where his career numbers were. Okay. So I've got the MLB averages, Riley's career averages, and his numbers last season in different 2-strike counts. Okay. An 0-2 count. MLB batted 148 last year. Makes sense. You get 2 strikes on you, you're expanding the zone, it's going to be bad. Austin Riley's career, he was a 153 hitter in that situation. So he's better than average. Last year, 133. So a 20-point swing from where his career numbers were. And these career stats incorporate last season. So this is including last year. 1-2 count, MLB was 164. His career was 182. He was well above average in 1-2 counts. Last year, 159. Like, he dropped below MLB average in that. A 2-2 count, he was right there at MLB averages. 170 is what they did last year. His career was 173. Last season, batted 113 in 2-2 counts. And in a full count, he was a 220 hitter in full counts. MLB average was like 190. He batted 129 last year, almost 100 points worse than his career average. And I think some of that is the pressing, yes. But I also think some of that can be you need to more aggressively change your approach in those situations when you get 2 strikes. And I remember this being a talking point for Atlanta a little while back about, hey, the first strike is yours, right? The first strike is yours. You can do whatever you want with that first strike. Once you get a strike or 2 on you, it is now the team's at bat. And I feel like that's something that's been missing. And I feel like that's something Tim Hyers is going to bring back.
Yeah, I like that idea. The first strike being yours, and then figuring out after that, making the right adjustments moving forward. I'm really excited to see what this Braves offense looks like under Hyers, because again, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning of the show. You started off the season quite bad because the offense just couldn't figure it out. They were sitting at the warning track over and over again, always going from that home run. Obviously, injuries are involved, sure, but for the product on the field, they were struggling to get, just hits into the field. Mm-hmm. If you can make those adjustments in game after you see that first bat, after you see that first strikeout, wherever the case may be, seeing a couple pitches, if you can make those right adjustments. And again, that's fundamental baseball. I understand what I'm saying. I understand that all 30 MLB teams are trying to do the exact same thing. But being able to establish that product and making in-time game adjustments is going to be a huge factor. And Hyers has proven that he can do that. He did it in 2018 with the Red Sox. He did it in 2023 with the Texas Rangers. He made it all the way. And this is a team that we have known, based on this roster construction, when healthy, Lindsay, that they can be a team that can be right back in that mix and be in contention for a World Series in 2025. Add into this mix of a guy that has, championship pedigree as a hitting coach that's not afraid to make those adjustments. That sounds like he's going to have confidence with the team in the clubhouse, that are going to listen to him when they're pressing, when they're not making the right adjustments. That's huge. And I think that's going to go a long way into spring, in the summer, and then hopefully to the Fall Classic.
Yeah, and another area where I think that you mentioned it earlier when we played the clip, you're only as good as the strikes you swing at. I think this is another area where there's a dude who could take that final step to becoming one of the elite players in baseball, and it's Michael Harris II. He was good with runners in scoring position last year, batted 299 with an 800 OPS, right? Like, he was good, but the two things in the swing decisions tenet for Tim Hyers was your chase percentage and what are we swinging at to maximize your strengths. Chase percentage last year, Michael Harris was in the 3rd percentile in all of baseball, 39.6% chase rate. A reminder, you want the percentiles to be as high as possible. And it wasn't just a pressing thing. 2023, 6th percentile, 38.1%. 2022, 7th percentile, 39%. He's never been good at not chasing. And so I think that is an area you can see the improvement, but also the other part of that. What are they swinging at to maximize their strengths? I went digging on Michael Harris and I saw something that was absolutely astounding. Okay, so I'm going to put up a graphic on the screen real quick. This is a concept of attack regions. So kind of like how for pitching, we divide the zone up into different boxes. This is the same idea, but for hitters. There's 4 different boxes to the strike zone, and StatCast has all of this stuff. There's the heart of the plate. These pitches are almost always strikes, and this little box does not extend to the edge of the strike zone. And then from a ball width inside the strike zone to a ball width outside the strike zone, that's the shadow. These pitches could be balls, they could be strikes. You don't know, right? So you have to be mindful of these. And fun fact, the MLB umpires are graded on if the pitch is in the shadow or not. I don't believe it matters if it's a ball or a strike, right? Like they don't get punished if it's outside of the zone but in the shadow and they call a strike. They don't get punished for that. That's why the public umpire metrics don't match the league's umpire metrics. Fun fact there. Outside of the shadow, which is again a ball width inside the zone to a ball width outside the zone, is the chase. This is where hitters get attacked by pitchers who want you to expand and swing at balls that are not strikes. These balls are almost always called, or these pitches are almost always called balls. And then outside of that is the waste. And these pitches are they are non-competitive pitches. It was a wasted pitch by the pitcher, right? Ideally, if you're a pitcher, you want to live in the shadow and in the chase. You don't want to leave pitches over the heart of the plate, okay? So, all right. So I've established the 4 zones. You're only as good as the strikes you swing at. That's the thing for Michael Harris, because I want to give you a really frustrating stat. When they divide up your hitting by those 4 attack regions, right? In the heart of the zone, Michael Harris was worth a -3 run value in the heart of the zone. Pitches that are no doubt strikes, he was worth a negative run value. Now, when he swung, he was good, +3 on the swings, but he lost 6 run value on taking pitches in the zone. And for a guy who chases as much as he does, again, he's one of the worst in baseball at chasing. He's not Javi Baez bad, but he's one of the lowest rated chase guys in baseball. You have to take advantage of pitches in the zone. And I think if that is the thing that Tim Hyers can fix or even just improve somewhat on Michael Harris, I think that is the key to making him a top 5 center fielder offensively and defensively in all of baseball.
I mean, that just goes back to his second tenet right there. You're only as good at the strikes you swing at, Lindsay. If you're not swinging at the strikes and the heart of the plate and taking those, then you're not as good. So being able to make those adjustments, as he mentioned earlier, and is doing it in game as well, if you are not swinging at strikes that you should be swinging at and then swinging at strikes you shouldn't be swinging at, you got to make some adjustments. I'm actually really excited. I'm glad you brought all that stuff about Michael Harris, because we saw a great jump from him. Coming back from his hamstring injury, he was one of the best offensive players for the Braves in the second half. But you're telling me, Lindsay, that there's a way that he can improve even more? I mean, that's almost as cool as his headband collection.
It's not just you look at approach, it's not just situational hitting. It's things like that. It's the low-hanging fruit. Hit balls that are over the heart of the plate. Like, shocker, but it's something that not every major leaguer can do. So there's low-hanging fruit here to give guys significant jumps in production. I'm excited to see what Tim Hyers can do. None of this stuff projects to be massive changes in what these guys are. His whole thing is let me just tweak this guy to make him a little bit better. So let us know your thoughts on the hire of Tim Hyers, bringing him into the organization. We will be back with another episode tomorrow. In the meantime, if you're on audio, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and also leave us a 5-star review. Those help folks discover the show. And we need your questions for the Friday mailbag, so send those in to us. And until next time, this has been Braves Today.